Hi there, welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. This time we're going to be talking about and actually learning how to bend metal with the power of our minds. It's a process called PK, or psychokinesis. Our guest is Jack Houck, a systems engineer who's been conducting research for the past 8 years on paranormal phenomena. What is psychokinesis?
That's the ability of someone to affect something with their mind.
How does it work?
That's a good question. There's a whole bunch of models, ideas as to how it actually works. I've theorized to have a conceptual model on how it does, but I happen to think that all paranormal phenomena work the same way. ESP, telepathy, psychometry, other forms of so-called paranormal phenomena. And it was actually in trying to understand the overall phenomena that I theorized that psychokinesis also works the same way, and essentially postulated that if you create a peak emotional event, you can get the mind to connect with the object at the current time, which is a very important feature of paranormal phenomena because there seems to be time shifts. And so by creating this peak emotional event, you can get the phenomena to happen at the current time. So to do that, I simply got a bunch of people together, 21 to be exact, in January of 1981. Said, okay, everybody, we're going to experience bending metal tonight. And we whipped up some instructions, and it worked. It worked so well that and I called that a PK party. In other words, I tried to create a party atmosphere, and I just had everybody, screaming and yelling and having lots of fun, and just really letting it happen, and having the permission to have it happen. Once everybody saw a little 14-year-old boy's fork fall over by itself, they had what I call an instant belief system change, and then it started happening all over the room. And what I mean by that is that the metal began to get soft for about a period of 5 to 20 seconds. And it just lost its structure. And during that period of time, once they were able to find that time when it was soft, they were able to form it into any shape they wanted to, wrapping up the spoon bowls and handles and fork tines, etc.
We don't always do this, but I think it's important at this point in time to give a little bit of a description of you. You are not someone in a long flowing beard and a long flowing robe with a lot of beads and adornment about you. You strike me as, if I were to encounter you on the street or in this business complex, as your average day American business person. You are dressed in a sport coat and a tie, and you look pretty straight and normal to me at this point. But you're telling me that in a very practical experiment, you were able to assemble 21 people and have them, in fact, bend metal with their minds.
85% in that first experiment. 2 didn't. In fact, one of the 2 was myself in that very first experiment. I was so mentally occupied with looking around and seeing what was happening, analyzing it, that I actually did not experience it. Well, the other person that did not experience it in that first experiment was a lady who had told a friend of hers before she came she didn't see any sense in bending silverware. And so she, in effect, put out the thought that she couldn't do it. In fact, she did not do it until 4 parties later. Of course, when you're the only one that doesn't experience it, you feel like you're really left out. What we've found in all of the PK parties that I've given to date, which has been 68 to this date in 3 years, it seems like the only requirement is being human. That is children, the over 60 crowd, everybody seems to be able to do it very well. And so it clearly is a capability that all of us have, and the way our minds, brains actually function.
You don't have to practice meditation. You don't have to be born in the Ukraine. You don't have to be a vegetarian. None of those things.
Absolutely not. All you have to do is be willing to try it, have some metal or silverware that you consider is approved for bending. That is, you obviously don't want to bend your mother's best silverware, and so so there's a certain amount of approval required. I mean, that is when it's okay to do something that I'll say, quote, weird, and with that, and then simple instructions, it's easy to do.
This is a total aside, and it has nothing to do with anything except the fact that my mind keeps going on it, and I'll never be able to ask a question unless I tell you this. But about 15 years ago, I worked with a man whose radio name was PK Powers, which has nothing to do with anything, as I said. But I'm sure if we could get him in an experiment, that would be a lot of fun. Can you do it at will now?
No, I can't do it at will.
Are you hitting for a higher average than you did the first time out? I mean, you were 0 for 1. Have you since been able to?
What I mean, when I interpreted your question to mean me personally.
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't go around demonstrating it to people. I don't think it's important what I personally can do. What I think is important is that I can teach large groups to do it, and there's a very clear evidence so far that group size between 15 and 40 seems to be the optimum size for a PK party. We have found that about 50% of the people who experience it at PK parties can then do it later at pretty much at will.
On their own, without the group?
Without the group.
I guess that's the nature of the question. Is it an individual capability, or is there strength in numbers?
I personally believe that in addition to this peak emotional event that I talked about, which you create at a party environment, there are many other psychological aspects that make it possible for individuals. For example, once you have in effect convinced your subconscious that it works, it seems that allows it to work at any time for you as an individual. In other words, people will sit by their television or radio and stroke their silverware, and all of a sudden it'll get soft and they'll bend it. There is an aspect of this that I call letting go. That's really when it seems to work, when you don't try so hard. I mean, I don't know if now's a good time to talk about the 3 steps, but let me just say we think there are fundamentally 3 steps. First is connecting your mind to the object you want to affect, which is easy. It's easy in our Western society. And the second step is actually commanding it to do what you want it to do. And that's also easy. The third step is letting go, letting it happen. And we're not really trained to do that in our Western society. And one of the things that happens at the PK parties is there's a lot of pandemonium going on. There's a lot of people screaming and yelling. They're experiencing this for the first time, and it's really a kick. So it tends to break people's concentrations. If they're concentrating on trying to affect their fork, and they look over to the other side of the room, bam, that's the time it gets soft. So oftentimes, one of the problems with the parapsychology community is they get people into a laboratory environment, and there's a lot of trying to get it to happen at that time, and it's hard to let go. It's hard to actually let it go. It's one of the reasons children are so good. They don't have long concentration spans, and they let go easily, and they do incredibly well.
Okay, let's do it. If someone who's listening right now would like to take part in this experiment, what do they have to have? What do they have to gather together?
Well, get either a fork or a spoon that, as I said earlier, was approved. That is, it's sort of a mismatch from your silverware. I particularly like to see people use silver-plated spoons, either tablespoons or teaspoons, because you can buckle the bowl when you're using PK, whereas you can't do that physically. So if you're concerned that you'd be using too much physical strength, then use a bowl of a spoon,
Okay.
and then you, as well as others, will be really impressed. But the real thing is to try to find the time when the silverware gets a little bit of warmth coming from the inside out. You actually feel it by rubbing it, and you either feel warm or sticky, and then that's the time to add just a little bit of extra pressure, and you'll feel it go. It becomes soft, lose its structure, and that's the sensation that I call kindergarten bending. That's what I try to teach most people, because once they realize they can do that, then they can do anything in their life. They can use that same simple set of steps to set their goals and achieve them.
Now this is a hands-on
This
bending.
is hands-on.
Okay. Do you ever accomplish it? Could they put the fork or the spoon on the table and bend it without touching it?
In a typical PK party, we go from what I call kindergarten bending, like I said, where two hands are allowed, they're looking for that softness, to what I call high school level bending, where we use typically half-inch steel rods, hacksaw blades that are the brittle type, things that don't normally bend easily with physical force, and that tends to get impressive. And then finally, at the end of the PK parties, I have people hold up using the bottom of, let's say, a fork, a dinner fork, and they just command it to bend, and they're not allowed to use their other hand. And we have many, many cases of the fork falling over by itself, the head of the fork falling over, or the tines bending and twisting around, and that is really impressive. And your whole belief in that stuff working is, when you see that happening or it happens to you, is completely changed.
Let's go back to the basics again. Step number 1 is that you identify this object and that you get a mismatched fork or spoon. Step number 2 is that you take it into your hands and concentrate on it. And
I'll give you a set of steps that I use. I would like to ask, though, that the people that are listening, if they're driving, not to do it while they're driving.
Okay. That's a good idea. Bend your steering wheel and you lose control.
Right. We don't want to have any accidents. So wait till you get to a condition where you can do it, and you allow yourself to get excited. It seems that, at least for psychokinesis, that it's allow yourself to really get excited. Now, when I tell people how to do this, I say rub it gently, just so you're feeling the warmth. Okay, and just hold it in your hand and feel for this warmth coming out of it. And I'll give you the instructions that basically go like this. You get a point of concentration in your head, and you make it very intense. I mean, you can think about something that you were really excited about sometime in your life, or get some kind of really intense focus. And then when you have that, I say grab it and bring it down through your neck, down through your shoulder, down through your arm, your hand, and put it into the silverware where you want it to bend. Now that simple step allows you to connect your mind to the object. And then at the PK parties, I have people shout very intently the command to bend 3 times. So then I count 1, 2, 3, and everybody shouts bend together. Now, people, if you're somewhere where that's not convenient here in the middle of the night, you simply intently command it in your mind to bend. The shouting is not really required. It's the intensity that's required, and the command. And then let it happen. Just let it happen. And you'll find if you test it now, occasionally, every couple minutes, it'll begin to get soft, and you'll feel that several second period when it's soft, and then just wrap it up. Just go ahead and bend it.
If at first you don't succeed, try again.
It's best in a big group, 15 to 40 people. So if you want to really do it with high success rate, do it in a group. We get over 85% successes in a group. The one Saturday night over in Berkeley had about 90 people and it had about 90% success rate. And it's only been on the very huge parties that I've had, one, for example, in Vancouver with over 400 people, where the success rate dropped to around 50 to 60%. And I think that's because I just needed more people helping with to talk to people and give them their a little special attention. But if everybody thinks about getting the whole San Francisco area as excited as they can, then we'll generate this peak emotional event, and many of you will experience it. If you don't experience it, don't worry about it, because it will happen to you if you get a large group together and do just exactly what I said.
I'm remembering stories that I've heard over time. Tell me if this is psychokinesis or not. A woman's child is run over by an automobile and the child is trapped underneath the rear wheel. The woman weighs 97 pounds and the car is 3,000 pounds or whatever it is. And she lifts the car up off the ground, and then the child is able to escape.
Absolutely. And as you can see, there's a very high component of emotion in there. She has this tremendous intent to get the car off her child. The structural weight of her the car would fracture her arm, except for by doing this process. If one were able to measure the temperature under the car during one of those events, for example, I predict they would find it gets very cold. And that's because somehow, many times, there is the energy, the real physical energy that we know in science, is taken out of the local air and mobilized to use as the force to lift an object. In PK parties, most of the time we find the heat coming from within the object, but there about 5% of the time we find this very coldness around the fork in the local air. And again, there's a point here that from a scientific point of view, we have to look for many different modalities. It doesn't always work the same way, but it does seem that if you give just simply the command, a goal, bend or get soft, then somehow nature, the system, I call it sometimes, mobilizes the necessary real energies to accomplish the goal. In most of the 85% of the time, we think the actual grain boundaries of the metal gets molten. In other words,
what does that mean? Are you changing the molecular structure?
You're melting. We have found a strong correlation between the numbers of dislocations in the metal and people being able to affect it. And so maybe one idea might be that these dislocations are actually like transducers of some form of energy, which we don't understand in science, which when dumped in large quantities along the grain boundaries just turns to real heat and melts those couple atomic layers of metal, and they, in effect, then all the metal loses its structure for this short period of time. When it resolidifies, it gets hard again. And those of you that just now experienced bending metal probably felt it get hard again, where it suddenly stops, and that's when the metal resolidified and the grain boundaries resolidified, and no longer would they allow the grains to move easily. One of the parameters that we also find is the thermal conductivity. The lower the thermal conductivity, the easier it is to find that moment. That's why stainless steel works particularly well, because it has forged stainless steel has the properties I just mentioned. It has lots of dislocations, low thermal conductivity. That low thermal conductivity holds the heat close to the grain boundaries longer, allows you to find it. Now, copper, for example, we find it's such a high thermal conductivity, the heat gets conducted away rapidly from those grain boundaries, and instead of you being able to find the moment when it's soft, the whole thing gets super hot, sometimes to the point you have to drop it before you burn your hands.
You spoke a moment ago to those people who have just successfully completed the experiment. Let's talk for a minute to those people who are held a fork or spoon in their hands and are still holding it and saying, "I'll believe it when I see it," kind of thing. Is through the experimentation that you've done and all the PK parties that you've done, have you figured out why it is that people go wrong? Where do they go wrong when they go wrong, and it doesn't happen for them? Are there some people that are immune to
Well,
this
if you didn't
potentiality?
if you didn't experience it, then switch hands. Sometimes we find something that simple will allow you to do it.
Is everybody capable of doing it?
Absolutely everyone. Even some of the big skeptics, scientists that this totally defies their scientific view, have experienced it. In big PK parties, I often move people around. For example, a wife and husband, they sort of have a subconscious interconnection that doesn't allow such an unusual thing to happen. So I move them to different parts of the room, and before long, they're both bending.
Can you do it on command now? I mean, I'm sure if you go out and talk to people in large groups, they say, "Oh yeah, okay, here it is. Here's a ruler. That's got some metal in it.
Right.
Bend that," and they hand it to you. How do you react to that?
A lot of people ask me to demonstrate it, and I absolutely refuse. The reason is that I don't want to become a performer. I mean, Uri Geller, for example, has been
Bending keys around the
bending
world. Yeah.
lots of stuff and
Uh-huh.
spoons and so on, and he's accused of being a magician. And my feeling and what I've seen is when a person experiences it for themselves, then they're convinced. Seeing someone else do it just doesn't do anything for them. So I refuse, and some people wonder about that, but I think it's, in my case, a good policy to, since I intend to be and continue to be a scientist and trying to understand the phenomena. It's not my objective to be a performer. So what we are doing is teaching people that they can do it themselves. Everybody can do it. And once they learn that they can do something as simple as bending silverware, then they should be able to translate that into all kinds of things that they can do in their life. I mean, it's very important that to realize by simply putting out a goal and doing it very intently that it'll happen. You can somehow the nature of the world in which we live marshals the right energies, and so it doesn't matter what the process is. It really matters that you be able to intently command the goal.
Is there an underlying spirituality here that I'm hearing?
I don't have any particular spirituality belief system. I think there is an overall desire to have world peace, and when one realizes that we have this total interconnectedness and that we can do things like this, then the overall, let's call it group or world consciousness, should improve and hopefully a better place to live.
Is there any fear that this potential could be used in a negative fashion?
Well, as with all advanced technology, there's the possibility of so-called misuse of it. However, I must say that most of the people that I've been attending PK parties, there seems to be an improved understanding of our connectiveness. So when you realize you're connected to your neighbor, when you hurt him, you're really hurting yourself. And so there begins to be a understanding that doesn't really allow you as an individual to misuse it. I'm sure it'll be misused. People ask me often about jails. And if a group in a jail were to get together and bend the bars, for example, that's conceivably certainly possible. But my answer to that is we've already figured out how to develop jail bars that are PK proof. In other words, we know the conditions of the metal that allow it to prevent it from happening. And so as with that game, we continue to develop the defense and I think there's lots of talk about the Russians and so on doing this, and
Messing up the Golden Gate Bridge, for example.
And similarly, I think there are defenses, and so there's an overall military application. But I think for the most people, there are applications such as healing. You know, clearly, if you can affect your spoon, you can affect your own body or your friends. So you get into the use of psychokinesis for healing, for bending your car bumper back, and so on and on. I mean, just be creative about your applications.
You are a systems engineer. I assume that your academic background is in science. Is that true?
My degrees are in aeronautical and astronautical engineering.
Okay. And many of the people that you associate with are what we might call hard scientists or members of the scientific community.
That's correct.
Okay. How do they feel about it?
Well, there's an increasing number of them that are experiencing it for themselves, and most people that are open-minded and smart realize that there's something to it, and then it catches their interest to realize there are things about physics that need to be furthered. I mean, there's clearly an interaction with our mind and nature. So what I'm finding is not that I'm an outcast and considered crazy, but instead I feel like a forerunner of a whole new development of science.
What about those individuals, and maybe they come from the Stone Age, but I would suggest that there are some of them listening right now who say, work of the devil?
I don't believe so. This is not the work of the devil. And in fact, certainly the ability to heal people and give people a whole new lease on life, that the fact they control their life. You know, a lot of cancer, for example, a personality trait they've found in cancer patients has been that they feel they can't control their environment, they can't control their life, and learn how to do psychokinesis and get rid of the cancer and control your life.
If we look ahead, the positive application is limitless. There are all sorts of wonderful things that could be accomplished if people would learn to control their mental energies. How about looking back in history? Are there any things, there are all kinds of speculations about how various things happened. Building of the pyramids, you know, there were never enough people put together at any given time that could have, using the levers available at that time, lift those stones that high up and put them in place and develop those designs and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure there have been cultures that have used this very effectively in their culture, and it's obviously we're not dealing with something new. I mentioned new technology earlier, but that's in the sense of us now beginning to understand it. This stuff has been working as long as there's been humans.
Do you think it will ever be lost?
Well, I hope not. In fact, I'm hoping that we will incorporate into so-called science the consciousness, and therefore it will become a natural part of everybody's lives.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.